The New York Islanders implode in a 5-1 loss to the New York Rangers. We'll have our key takeaways from this game and what it means for this team between now and the trade deadline. All that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast.
Your Locked On Islanders, your daily podcast on the New York Islanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday edition of the Locked On Islanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts so you get new episodes as soon as they drop. I'm Gil Martin. I have been covering the New York Islanders for almost 2 decades, and I wrote the book Ice Wars on the history of the Islanders' rivalry with the Rangers. Glad you could be with us today to talk a little Islanders hockey. I just wish it was under better circumstances. We're going to talk about the loss to the Rangers, what it means for this team going forward, especially at the trade deadline, and we'll have our weekly farm report on all things Bridgeport Islanders. Let's start with this game because it just did not work. This team did so many things fundamentally wrong that it's tough to even know where to begin. And the highlight of the game, other than the one goal by Alexander Romanov, was the first 5 minutes, where the Islanders had like the first 5 shots on goal in the game. They were kind of carrying the play, but could not get one past Igor Shesterkin. And you know, even when they did have chances in this game after the first 5 minutes, this team couldn't hit the net. So many shots were wide. There weren't a lot of good scoring chances, but when they had them, they just couldn't put the puck on the net, let alone in the net. And that was definitely part of the problem. Not the biggest part of the problem, though. For the biggest part of the problem, you've got to go to the defensive side of the ice. And this Islanders team just could not get out of its own way in its own zone. And when I say that, I'm going to start with this. Before the game started, the Islanders decided, Patrick Waugh decided, Scott Mayfield didn't play particularly well in the last game against Dallas on Sunday. I'm going to sit him, and I'm going to put Scott Perunovich back in the game. Adam Boqvist back in the game. And, I get it. Mayfield was coming off the injury. That was his first game back. He only played 10.5 minutes roughly in that game, didn't play in the third period, was on ice for 3 of the goals that the team gave up. I get it. But at the same time, when you're going up against a Rangers team with guys like Matt Rempe and, a team that has a little bit of size, boy, you taking a big guy like Scott Mayfield out of the lineup and putting a little guy like Adam Boqvist in the lineup is a calculated gamble. And it turned out to be a gamble that the Islanders lost. Waugh basically said, when he's ready, when the time comes, we'll put him back in the lineup. I'm sure he will be ready. And then when asked why Boqvist, he said speed. He's moving the puck well. He joins the rush. He'll help the power play as well. In all the games he played really well for us. So good to have him out there for that chance. Well, didn't go as you would have hoped, to say the least. And the defense needed a little more size in this game. Didn't have it. The Islanders, as a team, needed a little more physicality in this game. Didn't have it until it was a little too late. But more importantly, it was the way the defense did or did not pick up players in the defensive zone. Guys were left open. And worse yet, and here's again where the physicality and size enters into it. 3 of the 5 goals, maybe 4, Ilya Sorkin had one or more players in front of the goal, and the Islanders could not or did not move them away. And you know what? The greatest goalies of all time would not be able to stop a lot of those shots. That being said, did Ilya Sorkin play well in this game? Not even close. Yeah, he was screened and some of those shots were deflected. Absolutely, no question. But that doesn't let him off the hook. Sorokin was too far back in his net. He didn't play the angles well. He just didn't have it. I mean, look, you can talk about deflections and screens and all of that. When you only face 11 shots and you only make 6 saves, when you have a .545 save percentage, you're not winning. I mean, you are, even in an all-star game, that's not going to be good enough, okay? Let alone in a rivalry game against the New York Rangers. And this game was lost in the defensive zone and bottom 6 against bottom 6. Because in this game, the Islanders' bottom 6, the third and fourth lines, were both -2 in this game. And, that's Pajot, Cizikas, Siplikov is the third line, McLean, Engvall, and Gatcomb, the fourth line. All 6 of those forwards were -2 in this game. But wait, it gets worse. The defensive pairing of Ryan Pulock and Scott Perunovich, both -4 in the game that the Islanders lost 5-1. -4. Pulock and Perunovich did not get the job done. And they ended up, after that terrible start, not playing a lot in the third period. Only 16 and a half minutes for Perunovich, 18 minutes for Pulock. But at the end of the day, it just wasn't good enough. It was, again, a fundamental breakdown by this team of how to pick up players in your own zone, leaving guys open in the slot, leaving guys open to deflect shots and screen your goalie and not moving them out of the way. Guys, having 4 guys on one side of the ice chasing the puck. It was the same problems that we saw from the New York Islanders in the first half of the year when this team was struggling defensively. And to his credit, Jakub Skarek came in, played that third period, and look, he didn't really get tested. The game was over by that point, but he faced 7 shots, made 7 saves. Can't ask for more than that, right? And how weird was this? Patrick Waugh pulling Skarek for about a half a minute, 36 seconds, down 5-1 with about 8.5 minutes left in the game. Maybe he wanted the team to just practice a little 6-on-5. They've been so bad at it all year long. But again, just nothing there for the New York Islanders. By the end of the first period, you kind of knew this game was over. By the end of the second period, you definitely knew this game was over. And oh yeah, by the way, by the end of the game, the Rangers were down to 4 defensemen, maybe 5, because, one guy did come back late. But Islanders cannot take advantage. And it just wasn't good enough in any way, shape, or form. The offense wasn't there. The defense was shoddy. The goaltending was bad. The power play didn't do anything in the chance that it had. The penalty kill was, not really tested, but yeah, it just did not work. And here was a must-win game at home against your biggest rival. And after the first 5 minutes of the game, this team was flat. Can't happen. It just can't happen. This team just wasn't good enough. And let's face this, okay? It's not like the Rangers are a great team this year. The Rangers coming into this game were more or less in the same boat as the Islanders, having a disappointing season and on the outside looking in the very tight battle in the Eastern Conference for a playoff spot. Well, guess what? The Rangers solidified their bid. They're still in the thick of it. And the Islanders fell flat, got beaten badly, and just are fading. It's not a good thing for this team if you have any hope of trying to make the playoffs. And that's what we're going to talk about in our next segment. How does this team approach the trade deadline? What does this game and this loss mean for the Islanders for the rest of this season? Because it does indeed have an impact. When you lose a game that was described as a must-win game, there are consequences. We're going to talk about that. We'll have our weekly farm report on all things Bridgeport Islanders. And for our Islanders' birthday of the day, a forward who finished his career with the Islanders in the early 2010s. Let's see if you can guess who this upstate New York native is. We've got all that and more on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needs to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed Sponsored Jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. I've been in that spot where you need to hire like yesterday. The pressure is on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's exactly when Indeed Sponsored Jobs come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Again, that's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, Indeed, is all you need. Hero and go to the game quickly before we get to our next segment. Hero, I'm going with Romanov for the goal. Not a lot of choices here. And GOAT, I'm splitting three ways. I have to split it three ways. Sorokin, Pulock, Perunovich. You can't be -4 in a game and not be GOAT of the game. And you can't have a save percentage of .545 and expect not to be the GOAT of the game. So there it is. If you have a different opinion, feel free to comment on our YouTube page or, email me or whatever. But that's what I'm going with. And this was just a tough loss to swallow. So where does this leave the New York Islanders? Well, let's start with this. This night was not good to the New York Islanders. Scoreboard watching, okay, Columbus won. Philadelphia won. Montreal won. Buffalo even won, if you want to count that. Boston got a point by going to overtime to lose. The Rangers obviously won. The Red Wings won. So where does this leave the New York Islanders? Well, first of all, the only two teams behind the Islanders right now in the Eastern Conference are the Penguins, who are 2 points behind the Islanders, and the Sabres, who are 4 points behind the Islanders. Yeah, the Islanders have some games in hand on Pittsburgh, but that's not what you need to worry about. Right now, the Islanders have to pass 6 teams to get to the playoffs, and they are 7 points behind, and the only team they have a game in hand on is Columbus. So you're 7 points out of a playoff spot with 1 game in hand, and you need to pass 6 teams in order to get into the playoffs. And, oh yeah, you have 25 games left to make up those points. What did this team do? It's the same thing they've done in recent years. They had a 7-game winning streak before the Four Nations break. And they followed that up with a 4-game losing streak. And we're not done maybe with this losing streak. You got to play Boston next. But again, inconsistency. Even if this team, which probably has around a 20% chance at best right now to make the playoffs, even if by some miracle they get in, they're not going anywhere. Making the playoffs and hoping that Ilya Sorkin gets hot and Kyle Palmieri gets hot and Brock Nelson gets hot, and all of a sudden guys who have been inconsistent all year long suddenly play like they're future Hall of Famers is not a realistic strategy. At the end of the day, this team just isn't good enough. And to be honest with you, this team is also not bad enough. They're not bad enough to get a lottery pick. And they're not good enough to be a cup contender. They are the definition of the muddy middle. And they are stuck there with an aging team with no immediate prospects ready to step in. Yeah, you've got your Cole Eisermans and maybe your Danny Nelsons and a couple of other guys, but they're all at least 2, maybe 3 years away if they ever become anything at the NHL level. The reason you end up bringing in a Tony DeAngelo and a Scott Perunovich and an Adam Boqvist is because there's nobody in your farm system that you trust to come up and play 3, 2, 3, 5, 10 games while other guys are out injured. This team needs change. This core has been together a long time. And I love these guys. I'm a big Brock Nelson fan. Kyle Palmieri, Anders Lee, J.G. Pajot. These are guys who I have watched for years, who have contributed mightily to the New York Islanders over the last 5 to 10 years, depending on the player. And I rooted for these guys. I still root for these guys. But if you haven't won a playoff series in 3 seasons, and this year it's looking more and more every day like it's going to be a 4th season in a row, where either they're not going to make the playoffs or they're not going to win a round. If you were to say that this Islanders team is one of the top 10 teams in the NHL, I don't think anyone would keep a straight face if you were serious about that. And that's not to, badmouth these players. It's just where the team is. And running it back and bringing back some of these guys who are on expiring contracts and are entering their mid-30s, signing them to a 3, 4, 5-year extension or new contract, probably with a no-trade clause, and you're going to see diminishing returns as they get to be 35, 36, 37. It doesn't make sense. Everydayers, you've heard me say it so many times, this team needs to get younger, faster, and more skilled. I've been interacting with a lot of listeners and fans on social media. And, the great debate, who was the last great sniper the Islanders had? Some people say Ziggy Palffy. Some people might say Pierre Turgeon. Others say Mike Bossy. What's the point? None of those guys have played for the Islanders in the last 25 years. So if you want to go back to Bossy and say it's been 35 years, or Palffy or Turgeon, it's, 25 or 30, 35, whatever it is. This team hasn't had a bona fide all-star caliber sniper in a long time. And guess what? It shows in the standings. They entered last night's game 27th in the league in goals scored, last in the league on the power play. This is not a contending team. Their ceiling, if they stay healthy and everything goes right for this team, is to make the playoffs as a wild card, and maybe you steal a round. But when you haven't won a series in 3 going on 4 years, and you want to run it back with this same crew, that's the definition of insanity, right? Doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result. Lou Lamoriello, you say what you want about him, and I've been as critical of him as anybody. He's not dumb. He may have a very different view of this team than 99% of the rest of the world, but he's not dumb. And I just can't believe that he doesn't see the writing on the wall that this is the time to sell at the trade deadline. Kyle Palmieri, Brock Nelson, if you can get a very good deal for J.G. Pageau, if you can get a good deal for a Scott Mayfield, if somebody blows you away for a Noah Dobson, it's all there with the expiring contracts and guys who are playing well now who will probably never have a better trade value, guys like Pageau and Anders Lee. You at least have to explore dealing a number of these guys. I'm not saying trade them all, because that's not realistic either. But 2 or 3 of these guys at least have to be dealt if you can get a decent return for them. Because this team is not consistently good enough to get where these fans have been wanting them to get back to for 42 years and counting. All right, we have got more to get to. On today's show, we will talk about our weekly farm report on all things Bridgeport Islanders, plus our Islanders birthday of the day. All that still to come on today's Locked On Islanders podcast. Time now for our weekly farm report on all things Bridgeport Islanders. We do this every Wednesday during the AHL season. Bridgeport played 2 games since our last farm report. That was Saturday and Sunday. And, well, it wasn't the best of weeks for the Bridgeport Islanders. Saturday, they go up against the Utica Comets, and they fall by a score of 4-2. Dennis Chalowski and Chris Terry end up with the goals, but it just wasn't enough. And unfortunately, Henrik Tikkanen, 4th straight game, made 22 saves, but not enough for the win. And the Islanders fall to the Comets 4-2. On Sunday, they did a little better, but not enough. They end up falling to the Springfield Thunderbirds 3-2 in a shootout. Samuel Bolduc scores with 53 seconds left in regulation to get the game to overtime. Eetu Liukas had the other goal for Bridgeport, but again, not enough. And the Islanders fall in OT. They at least do get a point, but it's just been a frustrating season. Chris Terry, by far the most productive offensive player for Bridgeport. He has 48 points. Nobody else has more than 35. He has 16 goals and leads the team with 32 assists. Just FYI, no other player has more than 21 assists. So by a third, Chris Terry leads the team. Brian Pino, 19 goals. That leads the team, followed by Liam Foudy with 17, Chris Terry with 16. Samuel Bolduc, well, he has 7 goals, 28 points to lead all defensemen in scoring. Alex Jeffries, 8 goals, 23 points. Matthew Maggio, 6 goals, 16 points in 45 games. And William Dufour, 7 goals, 14 points in 41 games. Basically, again, this team continues to struggle. And you look at the standings, no doubt about it right now. The Bridgeport Islanders, 8th place in the Atlantic Division. They are 18 points out of 7th place, but they do have a game in hand right now. 12, 33, and 6 on the year. That puts them at 21 games below AHL 500. And yes, they do still, by a pretty large margin, have the worst record in the AHL. Right now on the schedule, a few games. They will play tonight at home against the Providence Bruins. That's a 7 o'clock Eastern time start. Friday and Saturday, 2 games at Lehigh Valley. Both of those are 7:05 Eastern time starts. So 3 games on tap this week for the Bridgeport Islanders, a team that just continues to struggle on the ice, and they're not really doing a great job of developing prospects at this point either. Hopefully, a strong finish would certainly be welcome, but I'll believe that when I see it. All right, time now for our Islanders birthday of the day, and today is the 48th birthday of former Islanders center Marty Reasoner. The Honey Eye Falls, New York, I hope I pronounced that right, native, 6'1", 205 pounds. He was a first-round pick of the Blues back in 1996, 14th overall. He spent 3 years at BC, made his NHL debut with St. Louis in 98-99, later played for Edmonton, Boston, Edmonton again, the Atlanta Thrashers, the Florida Panthers, and finished his NHL career with 2 seasons on the island, 2011, 2012, and then 2012, 2013. Reasoner played in 798 career NHL games, had 97 goals, 266 points, 379 penalty minutes, had 6 goals, 8 points in 24 playoff games, none of those on the island. But one of his better games with the Islanders, March 29th, 2012, Islanders hosting the Penguins at the Old Barn, the Nassau Coliseum. Marc-Andre Fleury and Al Montoya are the goalies, and in this game, our Islanders' birthday of the day, Marty Reasoner opens up the scoring. His first goal and only goal as an Islander, Mark Streit and Josh Bailey with the assists. The Islanders end up winning the game by a score of 5-3. Montoya making 26 saves, but for Marty Reasoner, he had a goal. He was a +1. He had 2 shots on goal, and that was in just 11 minutes and 32 seconds of ice time. So Marty Reasoner, a steady bottom 6 forward who played reasonable defense and could pitch in with the odd goal. He is our Islanders' birthday of the day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On Islanders your first listen every day. Thank you for making Locked On Islanders your first listen. For your second listen, find Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Become a fantasy hockey expert. Get the edge over your league mates with daily tips from hosts Steele and Flip. Find Locked On Fantasy Hockey on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you have a question, a comment, maybe a topic you'd like us to discuss on a future episode, email us at lockedonislanders@gmail.com. If you leave your first name and where you're from, we are happy to mention you on the air when we discuss whatever's on your mind. You could also follow the show on X at Locked On Isles, and you could follow me, Gil Martin, on X at Ice Wars, NYR VSNYI. We'll keep you up to date on all things Islanders all year long, and I am live tweeting during nearly every Islanders home and road game. So join me for some instant insight and analysis. Have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. And of course, let's go Islanders.